Don't forget to ask the question.
I will ask the questions, just as we're waiting for people to come in. We've got a bit of background music and Jack's going to be tested on what it is. Okay, we might just stop that there because I think we've got quite a number of people in the room. So good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Barwon Health Foundation, my name is Francis Trainor, and we thank you all for joining us today for the second of our series of Legacy Month webinars. I'm delighted to again have with me this afternoon our Bequest Ambassador, Jack Ayerbe. And for those of you who have tuned in before, you'll recall that Jack had given me strict instructions to play some music while we were waiting for them to begin these webinars. So Jack, I'm testing you again whether you can identify that classical musical piece.
Strauss the Senior Waltz.
Say that again.
Strauss the Senior Waltz.
Well, I'm not sure if what waltz did you say?
I said Strauss, the Senior Strauss.
Johann Strauss is correct, yes.
Johann Strauss, he was the elder. A waltz, written by him.
Okay, well, I've got it down as opus number 314 waltz, more commonly known as the Blue Danube.
Well, for heaven's sake, surely I can get 9 out of 10.
Well, I don't know, did they teach you musical appreciation at Wesley back in the 50s or 60s?
Absolutely, it was part of the course.
All right, well, we'll come back to that song because there's a bit more relevance to that, and we'll reveal that a little later on, so stand by for that. Anyway, let's get on, excuse me, with this afternoon's webinar. Please let me start with the Acknowledgement of Country. We, the Barwon Health Foundation, acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, the Wadawurrung people of the Kulin Nation. We pay our respects to the elders, both past and present. We thank the traditional owners for the custodianship of the land and celebrate the continuing culture of the Wadawurrung people, acknowledging the memory of honourable ancestors. And we also welcome, of course, all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us this afternoon for the webinar. Welcome again, ladies and gentlemen, to Barwon Health Foundation's Legacy Month and to our webinar this afternoon. Welcome to those of you who are joining us live, of course, and to those who are viewing this as a replay at some time in the future. Today is being run as a webinar, so you can see myself, of course, and our special guests. We can't see you, but you'll be able to participate, excuse me, and we encourage that by clicking on the raise hand button towards the bottom of your screen, and subject to time, we'll try and unmute you and get your questions for our guests. Alternatively, you can type in a question by clicking on the chat box. You can do that anytime during the webinar. For those of you who may have joined us in past webinars, you'd be familiar with how these are generally run with a special guest, a clinician, a researcher, or a leader from Barwon Health. And we'll be doing that today. But we also will introduce each week, as we did last week with Rory Costello, for this series of Legacy webinars, one of Geelong's prominent and influential leaders for a bit of a chat. So I'm really looking forward to that today with our special guests. Prominent Geelong philanthropist, tireless community volunteer and Geelong champion, the wonderful Keith Fagg, and Jacqui White, manager of the Palliative Care program with Barwon Health, based out at the McKellar Centre. Welcome to both of you, and we'll be getting to you shortly. We also welcome Mike Fairweather, who we're going to have a quick chat with soon, and I'll introduce Mike more formally then. And again, a big welcome to Jack Ayerbe, who's on the road today, and I sincerely thank Jack for being available. So, as you know, this month is Legacy Month, which is a time for us to celebrate life and to reflect on the legacy we are leaving or will leave when we depart this life. Our legacy is how we wish to be remembered, the values by which we have tried to live, and an opportunity to show appreciation and a lasting impact on what we see as important. I did mention this quote last week, but I think it is worthy of repeating, and it has much relevance to our lives and our legacy. Ralph Waldo Emerson was an American philosopher from the mid-1800s who once said, "To leave the world a bit better, to know that even one life is breathed easier because you have lived, that is to have succeeded." And I think you'll agree that they are very profound words, and it does make you reflect that giving the gift of good health is within reach of us all, not just our amazing healthcare heroes. I guess it's amazing and somewhat tragic what a difference a week makes in this COVID-affected world. This time last week, it looked like, at least for those of us in Victoria, that we may have turned a corner under the backdrop of COVID. Ever so gradually, people have been getting their jabs. The state government relaxed restrictions. We'd become the safe hub for AFL. And as it progressed from bad to worse in New South Wales, the embers, as they reported it, flew into Victoria And now the situation is looking a whole lot more serious again, even right here in Geelong. But if we follow all the right advice and get our jabs, we'll certainly get through it all. And we can be assured that Barwon Health's contact tracing team, who really were the gold standard that everyone else learned from last year, will be right on the job as this current situation unfolds. All of this means it's a good time to reflect and get our affairs in order. In Australia, a staggering 60% of adults don't have a valid will, 60%. And if the worst happens, that leaves a whole lot of complications. For some of us that do have wills, often they were done a long time ago. As we all know, circumstances change. What were priorities 10, 20, 30 years ago may not be the same today. So even if you have a will prepared, it's always a good idea to review it, ensure it's valid, and make doubly sure that your wishes are recorded properly. An interesting statistic is that if people are asked if they wish to leave a gift in their will to a charitable cause, the numbers actually double. So I put that to everyone viewing the webinar today. If you haven't already considered leaving a gift to a charitable cause, please give it some thought. There are so many great charitable causes, but at Barwon Health Foundation, we strongly believe there's no better cause than a consideration of giving the gift of good health, not the least reason being Geelong deserves the very best. And it really doesn't matter how large or small that gift may be. I know of some instances where some have realised that the assets they build up over a lifetime is such that it's a simple decision to, in addition to looking after family, of course, applying a small percentage to causes that are dear to them. To some, it's not only doable, but something that will give them and their family enormous pride that they'll be able to give the gift of good health and make the world a better place. There are also, of course, living legacies. These are donations made now that are placed into an endowment to provide sustainable support for Barwon Health Services into the future. There are so many wonderful examples, including a great number of people who have purchased a leaf either for themselves or in memory of a loved one for $500, $1,000, $2,000 on our lasting legacy tree, which has been established just alongside the main entrance to the hospital. We've also seen major gifts that have been placed into named funds of individuals and families as living legacies. There are so many great stories of giving, and in coming weeks we'll give you some of the examples of those. But none of the community giving is new, of course. In fact, Geelong Hospital was built on a legacy of giving from its early days in the 1840s, when a committee was formed by the Reverend Andrew Love, a name familiar to us all, to fundraise for a hospital for the Geelong community. They worked hard raising money and then received a bequest, our first bequest, which Ayerbe will tell you about shortly. If you'd like any more information on how you can make an impact, either right now or in the future, please give us a call at the Foundation. We'd be happy to have a confidential chat with you. And also, I'd just like to let you know that during Legacy Month, you can get your will written for free by one of our prominent local law firms who are donating their services pro bono for the good of the community. Now, please let me introduce a proud member of the Geelong community who has that wonderfully strong social conscience and belief to give back to the region that he loves. He's a well-known, respected and loved community member who is involved in diverse areas beyond his occupation as a vet. His passions include animal welfare and the fascinating science and research into One Health, which recognises that the health of people is connected to the health of animals and the environment. For many years, the Barwon Health was privileged to have Jack's contribution as a member of the Foundation Council. He's also involved with a group who go by the name of the Warsos. That's Warso, W-A-W-S-O, standing for We All Were Something Once. And I can tell you that unlike their acronym, they are absolutely still something. The group raised money for cancer research at the Adrian Costa Clinical Trials Centre at the annual dinner. And that group includes a fine man by the name of Mike Fairweather, who also joins us today. And both Mike and Jack, together with Bob Eadie and Richard Bunn, are also members of our bequest committee in Tim Malloy Society. So a big thank you to them all. So please give a virtual big hand for Ayerbe.
Thank you. I can't hear it, but anyway, you know, we all are so lucky. And I've said it before, and I'll say it again. I'll continue saying it while it happens. We are so lucky to have Geelong, because if you're going to get crook or sick, Geelong is the place to get sick in. The services and the standards are world class, and I say that with all sincerity. At the moment, it is fantastic, but we still rely very much on government grants and government support in order to survive. Now, you don't have to be a genius to recognise the fact that governments of all levels are going to be committed financially to very, very deep paybacks over the next 15 to 20 years. So some things will have to be cut out. And it is important that we recognise that perhaps at some stage, the income that we get from governments to Barwon Health won't be the same as they are now. So one way in which we can help this is in our legacies. Now, I've got 7 or 8 grandchildren, I forget which, but I would really hope that they, if they live in Geelong, will have the same quality of health care that we have. And it's important that we ensure for that. So we have the ability within our wills and with our bequests to leave money to ensure that the Barwon Health standard is continued on and recognised. Now, obviously leaving money in your will, you don't see the benefit of it. And this is talking about stuff that's going to happen in 20, 30, 40 years' time. But it's very important that we do recognise it because it is going to be such an important part of Barwon Health and indeed, I have to say, many, many organisations' ability to survive and continue on. And as Francis said before, it doesn't matter if you don't have many pennies, just a little bit will help. Because if a lot of people give a little bit, then that's going to add up and make significant amounts. So in order to recognise this, we formed what we call, and what many of you heard before, the Tim Malloy Society. And Tim Malloy, once again, was a shepherd who died, and as he was dying, wrote out his bequest. He was the first bequester to the hospital at that time, which is now Barwon Health. So we have our society called the Tim Malloy Society, which we get people together who have committed to donating something in their will to Barwon Health. We don't ask you what it is. We don't ask for any signed documents. All we need is for you to say, yes, I've left some money in my will. I'm a bequester to Barwon Health. Therefore, you become a member of the Tim Malloy Society. And very, very soon, you'll see some of the benefits of that, most of which is actually getting together, having a chat and a talk, and hopefully, Francis, a few wines occasionally. So the Tim Malloy Society is a very, very important part. The bequests are going to be a very, very important part. They won't really hit the road in a big way for about 10 to 15 years, but when that starts, it'll be a very, very good contributor towards the Barwon Health Foundation's finance. And remember, the foundation is set up to ensure that the standard and also the improvements to Barwon Health continue on. So I urge you, it doesn't matter how much it is, it can be as little as $5 to $10. Please think of us, Barwon Health, in your will. Thank you, Francis.
Thanks, Jack. And I think it's relevant that, look, we know that wills are very personal and some people don't want that information passed on to anyone, but we certainly don't need to see a will. But if you are interested in letting us know that you have made a direction in favour of a gift to Barwon Health Foundation, we'd love to hear from you because we want to recognise you while you're still alive. And there's one gentleman who joins us now who's actually, made a very important decision. We'll get to that shortly. And I did commend him. I'm going to do it publicly in front of the audience on the beautiful shirt that he's got on today. Mike, where did you get that?
New Zealand.
New Zealand. Okay.
Yes.
Very nice.
Two, one white one and this dark blue one.
Right.
It's not as loud as last week's guest, but it's still reasonably loud.
Terrific. Now, Mike, I mentioned before you're a member of the Warsaw Group. Can you tell us a little bit about them and the upcoming event you've got?
The event in October is, we decided a few years ago to raise money. Bob Eady was fairly sick with a cancer, and when he came back to lunch after recovery, he said, we're all sitting here doing nothing. We should be doing something. And he came up with the idea that we should be supporting Barwon Health and the Love Cancer Institute. So that's the way it started. Our first year, it's a fairly special evening that we do. It's for 100 people. And we try and raise $30,000 each night that we do it.
Yeah, I think the original intent was to raise money, $90,000 for a PhD scholarship, and obviously well on the way to that. Hopefully we can get to that this year, and that's in mid-October. I haven't got the exact date. It's around the 13th or 14th of October. I believe.
The
But
13th.
anyway, 13th,
The 13th.
okay. So Wednesday night. So if anyone's interested, give us a call and I'd be happy to pass on the information to you. Now, Mike, you had your own direct experience with University Hospital Geelong, in your case actually as a private patient. Can you tell us what happened there?
Because of my career, I ended up with bad knees, and the surgeon there, who's now head of orthopaedics, he suggested that I have both knees done at once. At the luncheon, everyone told me that was a stupid thing to do, other than Jack. They said, no, you can only have one done at a time. And I said, well, I'll go by the surgeon's advice. It was very successful. The service that I got as a private patient was just amazing, even as a public patient. I had to go back several months later because I ended up with a blood clot on the lung. And the service I got that time as just a public patient was just amazing. And from that and some advice from both you and Jack, both my wife and I decided it's time we changed our will. So we've bequested Barwon Health Foundation at that time. Yeah,
that's just wonderful. And how are the knees now?
100%. Best thing I've ever done. The quality of the hospital, the quality of the surgeons that we have in Geelong. We are, as Jack said, we're blessed with a very good health system, and that's a public one.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we thank you very much. We've got a lot on today, so I'd like to talk to you about it more. We might get you back again another week, but thanks so much, Mike.
My pleasure.
As I said, apart from that, Bob, Jack, Richard and yourself are also on the bequest committee, so a big thank you for that also. As I said earlier, we've got two very special guests with us this afternoon, and with the short amount of time we have today, no, we won't be able to do justice to them or for you who have tuned in, so I apologise in advance for that. Now, there wouldn't be too many people in Geelong that aren't immediately familiar with the Fagg name for a myriad of reasons, but the very crux of it possibly stems from the fact that the Fagg business is recorded as the 8th oldest family business in Australia and goes right back to brothers Samuel and William Fagg, who arrived in the region back in 1852. Now, 1852 also coincidentally aligns with the opening of the Geelong Hospital, or the Geelong Infirmary and Benevolent Asylum as it was known back then. And referencing back to the trivia of the opening music of Johann Strauss, he composed the Blue Danube on the other side of the world in Austria also, Jack, in what year? 1852, that's right. So Keith Fagg is quite a remarkable man, and to be perfectly honest, I don't think I've ever met a man quite like him. If the city of Geelong had a cheer squad, he'd be its #1 member. Welcome to Keith Fagg.
Thank you, Francis. Very generous of you. Thank you for that introduction.
So Keith, let's go back to 1852, when the Blue Danube was possibly playing on the jukebox at the Sphinx Hotel, which I assume was there back then.
Yes.
And tell us where Samuel and William came from, why they landed in Geelong, and how they came to establish their business here.
Okay, thank you. Well, so Samuel and William, Samuel is my great-grandfather, decided to leave their hometown of Deal in Kent in 1852 in search, we believe, for the gold rush, which was in full flight at that time. And they ended up landing at Point Henry in October 1952. And it's not immediately clear what happened to them, but we believe they headed to the goldfields. But soon found out that the streets weren't paved in gold in the same way that they thought they might be. And they neither had experience with mining or any sort of gold prospecting. But they did have experience in ironmongery and building. One was a builder, or one was a carpenter. That's William. And Samuel, my great-grandfather, was described as a clerk, but actually worked in the family ironmongery business back home in England. And so by 1854, we find records of Samuel and William joining a business in Pakenham Street in Geelong West, not too far from where Brack's Blinds used to be. And they are in business with a gentleman called Mr. Purnell. Now, we don't know what happened much more to Mr. Purnell in relation to that business, but soon thereafter they were running the business themselves under Fagg Brothers. And essentially that was the origins of the Fagg Brothers business, which is still operating today.
Well, that business has just grown and thrived over the past 170 odd years. And passed through the generations, including your father, Bert, who worked for a staggering 67 years in the business before retiring.
Right. Yes, he retired a bit like Ayerbe in '82, right? We knew his time had come. As soon as he retired after a few years, he said to us, "I wish I'd done that a few years earlier."
But I understand that he actually passed away in 2015 at the age of 98, still as chairman of the board.
Absolutely, yeah. Still in harness, still taking very much part of our board meetings and leading the company, and was our patriarch for many years. And he and his brother Stan, who died a number of years before him in 1989, led the company through that generation. And as sons of my grandfather, Charles Richard Fagg, who was also one of 9 children of Samuel Fagg. So that's
right. And then, so your father was a patriarch. Obviously, your mother was a matriarch, and she passed away a year after your father at the age of 94. So wonderful, right. Old bones, big life.
Exactly.
They're obviously remarkable people. So can you tell us a little about them and how they shaped and inspired you?
Okay. Well, look, Dad was the quintessential quiet achiever. Those of you who might have known him, who might be listening in, would know something of him. He was in Rotary, for instance, for over 40 years, but was never president of his club. But he was a hard worker, always the first and last of any events, loved selling raffle tickets, and was heavily involved in many projects, both here and overseas, supporting them over the time. So he certainly, and like members of everything from the Belmont Kindergarten to the Geelong Lawn Tennis Club, he gave us all in our family example of community service and involvement. And that was complemented beautifully by my mother, Ruth, who was a daughter of a Methodist minister. And she was also a teacher and had 6 children, of which my sister Deborah didn't survive, sadly, after one day. But brought 5 children. It was a very big family, but always busy in church and community affairs. She was in things like Community Aid Abroad, which I think is a forebear organisation of World Vision, I think, or Oxfam, and in Geelong Citizens Advice Bureau, and many organisations which perhaps have been renamed over the years in Geelong, but were instrumental in that post-war era. They were married in 1945, just at the end of the Second World War, and so my generation is certainly the full-on baby boomers, and saw the benefit of that. We're all born at Baxter House. Mm-hmm. And I can remember driving past with my father in the car. We weren't as children allowed to visit Baxter House in those days to see our sibling, our new babies. So all Mum could do is hold the baby almost to the window, Michael Jackson-like, to show us as we drove past in the car what our baby sister looked like, Marion looked like. So a long connection with Baxter House and Barwon Health and Geelong Hospital as was in those days.
No, amazing. Now, you had a long involvement in the family business as well, and just like Samuel and William, worked alongside your brother, Barry, growing and expanding the business. Yep. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Well, I think like most family businesses, you start at the grassroots, and when you're 13 or 14, you're looking for a bit of income on the side to buy some things with, like my first trumpet. You ask for a job in the family business. So my first pay packet was $12 delivered in a pay packet, the old style pay packet. And I believe I didn't ever hit the payroll at that stage. I was petty cash. And I worked for 6 weeks during school holidays back in the late 60s, and continued on school holidays and university holidays, learning the basics, bagging up nails, counting out hundreds of screws each Saturday morning, we used to sell bulk mineral and terps and methylated spirits and linseed oil underneath the shop. If ever we'd gone on fire, we would have blown the whole South Geelong to smithereens. So that was a bit of our family history. And then I rejoined the business in '84 and went straight. And from then, my brother and I had some years working with Uncle Stan. And then when he passed away, we sort of took over, I guess, more the corporate administration and management of the business, and did our best to grow the business in many ways, and also very much make sure that we had active community involvement, everything from United Way, which is now Give Where You Live, and supporting many other organisations. And we have the beauty of having a business is we have, as directors, a bit of flexibility to put some time into those organisations along the way.
Yeah, well, that's right. And so you no longer work in that business, so that's now in the hands of Barry, who I must say,
well,
remarkable.
It's now part of the Mitre 10 group. Barry has a small ongoing interest there, and we're both on the board still, and actively want to see the business to contribute and be active in Geelong community in many ways.
Well, he's also a remarkable man. But as you sort of left the business, or the day of the business, you pursued other interests, so many other interests. So you were educated at Geelong College. You've got a Bachelor of Economics with honours, as well as a Certificate of Management from the Gordon Institute. You've been involved in various positions at the Victorian Chamber of Manufacturers, Uniting Church and the Australian Resources Development Bank. And in 2012, you became the City of Geelong's first directly elected mayor. You're an accredited mediator with the Department of Justice, an active Rotarian, a founding member of the Rotary Club of Cardinia, a past president, Paul Harris Fellow. You served for 20 years on the Rural Ambulance Victoria Board. You've been involved with the Uniting Church Australia Frontier Services as a board member. So many community boards such as Samaritan House, Salvation Army, Hope Bereavement Care, Geelong Advertising Music Trust, and you're also an independent member of the Victoria Police Regional Leadership Team. Now, obviously, Barwon Health Foundation would believe that supporting a health service is important, but there are so many great causes in Geelong that Keith's been involved with, including Barwon Health, Anamkara, Give Where You Live, where you mentioned before, and the list just goes on and on and on. So not surprisingly, you've also been honoured with an Order of Australia medal for your extensive contribution to the Geelong community. Now, Keith, your enthusiasm and passion for the town runs so deep. Can you explain that passion and how you managed to fit all this in?
Well, I think what you've read out there, Francis, is the case for the prosecution case for a person who can't say no, right? There's a degree of that. I'm sure, like many around the table who I can see, and those who are probably listening in, you like to do what you can, and if people approach you to be involved in things, and if you think they've got the skills or they see in you the skills and capacity to achieve certain things, then you like to support them as much as possible. So, as I said before, my parents, the legacy, we talk about legacy in terms of this month, but legacy in terms of their values. It's all about community service and engagement with people. It's all about people at the end of the day and connection. That's actually why I became involved very actively with the Palliative Care program, Dignity Therapy, which we'll talk about in a moment, hopefully. And Jacqui's there too, which would be great to hear from Jacqui as well, because it's a personal one-to-one connection. At the end of the day, it's all about relationships and about quality relationships and empathy and compassion and humility, and that's what sort of, I guess, drives me. I had no ambitions when I was elected mayor. Had no agenda to go anywhere further. I just thought that was the next best step for myself in terms of perhaps being able to serve the community in different ways. Didn't turn out quite the way I expected, but it did actually ended up opening up other opportunities where I could perhaps do some more things, including dignity therapy. If I hadn't have stepped down when I did, I wouldn't have actually had the chance to get involved with dignity therapy and the Palliative Care program at Barwon Health.
Yeah.
And I'm very happy to have a chat about that, if you like.
Well, I was interested, actually, before we get onto that, to learn that in the early 1980s, you must have been in your 20s at the time, I think, you worked as a volunteer on-road ambulance officer with St John Ambulance in Darwin. And then at the same time, you worked alongside Aboriginal people and communities in the Arnhem Land. What did you learn from that experience?
Well, my work was in 1980. My wife Heather and I got married, and we headed straight to Darwin. But we both had jobs up there. Heather was a teacher, and I was working with the Uniting Church in an administration, finance, and human resources role based in Darwin. And I spent a lot of time working with Aboriginal communities in Arnhem Land and in the Kimberley, and was based in Darwin, but a lot of travel, light aircraft travel to me between those communities, and it was a great privilege to be involved. Often when you're living down south, you come up with quite a black and white view, if I can use that terminology, of the issues we need to deal with up there. But you come back with lots of shades of grey up there. You come back with more questions perhaps than answers. But it was a great privilege to work in that context. along the way, the ambulance service in Darwin at that stage was manned by full-time officers during the day, but evenings and weekends was volunteers. They didn't have the funding to have a 24/7 fully professional service. So they engaged volunteers, and they were running short of volunteers at the time we were up there. So they advertised, and I was one of the ones who sort of volunteered to get on board. And I like to say that I spent the next 2 years inflicting first aid on any poor soul that needed it around the Geelong, the Darwin community. And that was a great experience. You saw a lot of aspects of life you wouldn't otherwise see. And hopefully we helped some people along the way there. I almost delivered a baby. That's another long story. But I hopefully helped someone get to hospital in time to get the proper treatment. That was a great experience, but I don't claim to have any first aid skills particularly anymore. That was a long time ago.
Keith, there's another organisation you're involved with, which I think speaks a little bit about you, the Geelong Angels. Can you tell us a bit about them?
Well, that's really that's a business organisation, and it's really about encouraging startups in the Geelong community, business startups, and it's a group of business people from the Geelong region who want to encourage entrepreneurs and who have got an idea, a germ of idea, which they want to take further and expand into perhaps a viable business. And our group seeks to support them, make a small investment in their business, but also work alongside them, become board members or advisors or mentors to them as they develop their business. And we've probably invested over the years, over the last 6 or 7 years, in about 15 businesses, and some really interesting ones. There's one business called Smart Snug, which is a Geelong invention. Basically, it's a sleeping bag which is connected to a sensor, which helps monitor a baby's breathing, a temperature, movement, etc. And it works with an app with your mobile phone, so parents can monitor what their babies are doing in their cot quite remotely. So it's quite an amazing invention, and it's just about to hit the market in big time. So that's just one example of some of the great thinking around the Geelong area. This is based at Runway at North Geelong, at the Federation Mills site.
Yes, yeah. Well, so obviously it said special purpose and/or benefit to the community is what you're sort of interested in. Most people would know opposite the Geelong Hospital is Kitchener House, the old nurses' quarters, which I think Jack might have jumped over the fence and tapped on the windows many years ago. A lot of people are familiar with that. Behind that, Kitchener House, is the Health Education Research Building, where high-level research takes place, and it also houses some of the Deakin School of Medicine, where students attend lectures and the like, and also undergo simulation training.
Yeah.
And there are fully decked out hospital rooms, birthing suites, and emergency department pods. And it's quite a fascinating place. And there's also sorts of simulation training exercises undertaken there with a combination of robotic patients and real life volunteers. Now, Keith, I understand you've been known to strip down to the backless tied hospital patient gown to act as a patient in need of medical help.
But you have to get right in. You have to get right into the swing of it to give a genuine experience. So probably the last 6-7 years I've been involved as a volunteer simulation payment with patient, particularly with Deakin University medical students, so final year medical students, but also with a number of Barwon Health simulations we've had over the years. And it's great fun to be involved with it. Really, it's good to know you're helping out junior and doctors and nurses in training to expand their skills and get confidence working with a real person other than as opposed to a mannequin. The mannequins these days are high tech, as you probably know. They can do amazing things, but they still don't relate to you as a person. And that's what this simulated patient is all about. Although the height of my achievements of simulating patients, Francis and friends, was when I was asked to be almost at death's door and being resuscitated as a resuscitation video for Barwon Health. And all I had to do was lie there with blue lips and make out that I was actually dying. And next thing you know, they're operating on me, or resuscitating me, not me, but the damn mannequin dressed in the pajamas I was then wearing. So it's a fun thing to do. Like with a lot of volunteering, and I know Barwon Health is all about volunteering and supporting volunteers. All the things you do, you feel you gain far more than you give. It's the experience you have and the people you meet. That just enhances your life much more. And if you can contribute something in a small way along the way, that's also that's a good thing too.
Hey Keith, at the age of 49, you decided to take up marathon running. Now, at that age, it'd be a great achievement to do one marathon, tick it off the bucket list, and hang up the racing bib.
Yeah.
You've gone on to record just a few more.
Well, yes, thank you. It wasn't quite a midlife crisis, but almost. And I was challenged to do a marathon. I used to do a bit of running, a bit of footy umpiring before that. And when I was challenged to do a marathon, my head said, no way, I was too old, not fit enough. You know, that's for young people who are fit and athletic. But my heart said, well, this is a bit of a challenge. Let's give it a go. So I was fortunate with Rotary to be part of a big Rotary group of 200 runners who did the Paris Marathon in 2005. And we raised money for the Rotary program, Polio Plus, as part of that. And since then, we've gone on to do marathons in a number of places around the world, always raising money for Polio Plus. So I've been, my knees, until my knee gave out, I've able to run 16 marathons, but I can't run them anymore that distance, but I walk them, and I do. So I've walked about 10 marathons and lots of half marathons, and that's just but because there's two types of runners that Jack would know. There's runners that are injured, and there are runners that are going to be injured. There's only two types, and so when you end up with an injury, you just have to modify your activities accordingly.
Keith, your opinion pieces in the Geelong Advertiser are a must read. You've covered topics ranging from reconciliation through to earlier this week an open letter to the Federal Health Minister, Greg Hunt, asking for a greater focus to be placed on mental health of our young. We haven't got time to talk about that now, unfortunately. We are running a bit short. And we do want to get on to Jacqui, but just very quickly, you mentioned before the Dignity Therapy program. Just tell us just a quick snapshot of that.
Of Dignity Therapy? Yeah. So in 2013, I heard about the Dignity Therapy program being run by Russell Armstrong of the Palliative Care Unit of Mackellar, and was taken by what was involved. At that particular point of someone's life, when you have a life-limiting illness, you have the opportunity to record and have a conversation that's recorded and then preserved as a legacy document, someone's innermost thoughts and learnings from life and messages for their family and reflections on their life. Was such a wonderful program that I put my hand up to volunteer for that. And that's how virtually I first become a volunteer with Barwon Health. And since then, I've been privileged to work with probably about 40 people, I think, in that time. And the whole program's on, I think, almost 200, Jacqui, if that's right. People who have had life-limiting illness, often cancers, but sometimes it's MND or other forms of illness which is life-limiting. And it's an absolute privilege to be able to work with people in that situation. We go in as complete strangers, us as interviewers and editors, and start talking with people about some of the most intimate questions, parts of their life, or the deep and meaningful questions. And because we go in as strangers, there's very few filters. People just tell it as it is to us, and they say things to us that I'm sure they can't say to their family because they're too close, they're too emotional. The things they want to say to their family often, but can't because it's just too close. It's too painful, it's too emotional to say that. So we record the interview. We then have it transcribed by volunteers, and then as interviewers and editors, we edit the document to put it together into an order and to make it flow. We take our words essentially out as interviewers, make sure that the voice of the person is always preserved. We then read it back to the person and make sure they're happy with what's in the document, and we perhaps add some things in or take some things out. At its core, dignity therapy is a therapy, and it's there to benefit the person in the moment. The legacy document we produce is a lovely subset of that, but it's not the main game. And often there are some things that people might say, but they actually want recorded in black and white for posterity, if you like. Then when we finalise the document, we print it off, put some pictures in that the family might supply, and present it back to the person to say, this is what you've said, and this can be your gift to your family. But generally, this happens, well before anything might happen in their lives. But sometimes the person might pass away before we are able to complete the work, and then under the instructions they've left, we can hand that to their family. And I've seen some wonderful examples of where those documents have been given to family members as their parting gift, if you like, not a physical or financial gift, but a gift of words and of care and love and that's what a number of us volunteers do at Barwon Health Palliative Care, and that's how I got to know Jacqui.
Well, you said it's a privilege doing it, but it's really inspirational and maybe, I assume, emotionally draining, but so extraordinarily generous of your time to be doing this. In fact, if I could be as bold as speak on behalf of the entire Geelong community, I'd say to you, Keith, you are much loved, much admired, enormously respected, and your work in the community with the homeless, the sick, the dying, encouraging, investing in the emerging bright minds of the region, your encouragement to others to give to the community, and that's all probably just scratching the surface. You're a true treasure of Geelong, and we thank you.
You're far too generous, Francis.
Well, we thank you sincerely for your extraordinary and humbled, commitment and contribution to Geelong. And I must say, your wife Heather and children must be enormously proud, but also very supportive of your pursuits, and we thank them too. And may the Fagg name and bloodlines and community passion and spirit live on and continue for another 200 years and beyond in Geelong.
Thank you.
Sorry, just very, very quickly, because I need to get on to Jacqui, but are there any are there any Fagg boys?
Well, there's Fagg children. There's three from Heather and I have, and our oldest son Mark, and then our younger son Chris, and then our daughter Liz. None of them are involved in the business, but all work for the business over the years.
Good. Well, so the Fagg name will live. And I was actually going to offer Jack as
oh yes, I told you, mate. Yeah, yes,
we
have a granddaughter, and she's a Fagg. Don't worry about that.
Terrific. All right. Well, now we turn our attention. Thanks very much again, Keith. We turn our attention to palliative care and the manager of the program, Jacqui White. Now, Jacqui's been a qualified social worker for 28 years. In addition to her social work qualifications, Jacqui holds a Bachelor of Arts, Masters in Women's Health, Master of Gender Studies, along with specialist certificates in both palliative care and leadership and management. Prior to joining Barwon Health in 2007, Jacqui was employed in a number of settings within public health care in both Australia and internationally, including working with sub-Saharan African HIV-positive asylum seekers who were survivors of torture and trauma in the context of civil war, survivors of family and sexual violence, and palliative care in both HIV-specific hospice and specialist community and inpatient palliative care settings. Jacqui led the clinical team at the Centre Against Sexual Assault based at the Women's Hospital and joined Barwon Health initially to work in both palliative care unit and community palliative care program as a senior social work clinician. Jacqui's been working with the palliative care as manager since 2017. Welcome, Jacqui. Now, Jacqui, I'm mindful that some people may not have a great understanding of what palliative care actually is. How do you define it?
I actually think Keith has touched on a lot of the things that help to define what palliative care is. I guess in palliative care and a definition of palliative care for one is that we're actually working and aiming to support people who have life-limiting illnesses, and the care focuses not just on the physical or medical care, but actually all of the quality of life elements of their care. So looking to support them around managing symptoms, but also, their social, their emotional, their spiritual needs, and providing advice and support to both their family and friends. And I guess it's about trying to support people to live the absolute best quality of life they can for whatever duration of life they have. And it's not just about those few days or weeks at the end of somebody's life, but we can, within a palliative care context, be working with people for many months, if not years, depending on their individual circumstances.
Can you tell us a bit about the palliative care service at Barwon Health?
Yeah, we're really fortunate. Now, I guess it's picking up a little bit of what Jack was saying before. We're incredibly fortunate at Barwon Health that we have what's a really unique program. We're what we call an integrated palliative care service, in the sense that all of the elements of our palliative care program sit under the auspices of Barwon Health. So we have a hospital-based consultancy team that sees, on average, about 1,000 people a year, give or take, and with well over sort of 1,200 contacts per year. We've got our 12-bed palliative care unit that works with that provides over 5,000 bed days a year, and approximately 250 people per year are cared for there at the end of their lives. We've got our community palliative care program, which is working with people in their own homes or in their places of residence, so including their homes, but also, you know, if they're living in a residential aged care facility and needing specialist palliative care. And we work with about, probably about between 200 and 240 families at any one time. And, you know, on average, certainly within community palliative care, receiving about 45 referrals a month, with about 50%, give or take, of our patients actually having their terminal care at home. And pretty much everybody, regardless of whether they receive their terminal care at home or in another setting, we're pretty much, I think we have a 99% rate of meeting people's preferred place of care options. So that's really important, not just where you die, but actually, is it actually where you want it to be at the time of at the end of your life? And I guess in addition to community palliative care, in 2019, the program introduced a new service, which is called Pallet Home, which is offering a more intensive nursing and medical support as a bed substitution. So essentially very similar to a hospital in the home. So people are in their own homes, but they're actually receiving an inpatient level of care in their own home settings. And so that's been a really well received service by families. We've got a very small clinical trials program, which oversees both our clinical trials work, but also internal and research projects. We have quite a strong commitment to supporting emerging researchers within our field. And I guess last but absolutely not least is our really important people like Keith, our volunteer program. So we have about 85 volunteers linked in with the palliative care program who are providing a range of different services and are very much, I guess, allow us to be as innovative and as holistic as we are.
Yeah, what will we do without volunteers?
Oh, absolutely. I always talk about, I think the volunteers allow us to be, as clinicians, allow us to be incredibly creative, but also to think outside the square and to really follow through and actually provide the most holistic care.
Yeah. I think I'm right in saying I heard you speak at a function. You said that 70% of the people you care for have a malignant diagnosis,
Yes.
cancer.
That's right. About 70% of our patients have a malignancy or oncological diagnosis, and so then we have about 30% who fall into the category loosely that we call non-malignant conditions. So that might be people who have motor neurone disease, people with very advanced dementias, respiratory conditions, renal disease, those sorts of things that are sort of within the cancer. And there is that often that misconception, I guess, that palliative care is only for people with cancer. It certainly isn't. It's for anybody who has a life-limiting illness where there is no other further disease-modifying treatment. We never talk about there's no cure or there's no treatment available, because there's always something that we can do to manage people's care and their symptoms. But it's about what's the focus. Are we looking to cure, or are we looking at about symptom management?
And it's across all ages too, of course. Sadly, we know of a girl, we were talking to her mother not so long ago, a 17-year-old girl who passed away in the unit, and I think there was an 18-month-old child fairly recently too. So very sad, but amazing.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's, I guess, one of the unique things again about our program is that we work with people from 0 right through the age spectrum. So yeah, and at any one time, probably I think at the moment we have 8 children and young people on our community palliative care program that we're providing care for.
The service is very broad, so can you tell us the sort of mix of disciplines you have working across the program?
Yeah, and again, we're a little bit different to other services across the state in that Barwon Health has made quite a commitment to developing a very multidisciplinary program. So we have a strong workforce group of obviously medical practitioners and nursing team members, but we also have a very strong set of allied health practitioners, so occupational therapy, physiotherapy, social work, psychology, and then our supportive care team, which incorporates Russell, who Keith mentioned before, who's our spiritual care worker. We have grief and bereavement counselling. Our volunteer coordinator sits as part of that team, so she's embedded within our program, which again is about how you position volunteers as a really important part of our service provision. Clinical nurse, clinical trials work, you've got data intake, all sorts of different things. So yeah, quite a mix of disciplines across the program. And very much, I guess, working, all of them working very collaboratively in what we call interdisciplinary. So working sometimes across disciplines, very much with patient care and patient-centred care at the forefront, and trying to, implement as much innovation as we can.
We hear about people, wanting to die at home, and I guess once upon a time, that just wasn't really, practical to do. But can you tell us a bit about this from the palliative care program perspective?
Sure. Yeah. Certainly, there's certainly a lot of work that's been done, internationally and nationally, looking at people's preferences around where they receive their end-of-life care. And certainly, when I first started working in palliative care, specifically here in Geelong, we were probably providing terminal care at home to maybe about 15-20% of our patients. Yet we knew at the time, and certainly the work of Stephen Duckett and the Grattan Institute reinforces this, that probably about 70% of people want to have their terminal care at home, and yet we weren't alone, we're only meeting that need maybe between 14 and 20% of the time. So that focus, I guess that continued focus of people wanting to have their terminal care at home has remained. It's not there for everybody, not everybody wants to do that. And yet I guess our focus has been around looking at how can we strengthen the community care that we provide, and part of that is the Palliative Home Service again gives us another way of supporting people to remain at home. And now within our region, people who are linked with the program, we have about I think last financial year it was 42% of our patients that we cared for through the terminal phase actually had their terminal care in their own homes. So that's significantly higher than state average, which is fantastic, and I guess still something that we continue to work on, but always balancing that against where are people's. We always want to understand where people's preferences are and acknowledge that it changes through. Often will change through the trajectory of someone's illness. They may start off saying, I want to have my care at home, and then maybe for whatever reason that changes. So as long as we're meeting people's preferences and wishes, that's the most important thing.
Yeah. Jacqui, there's a number of projects the palliative care program works on. We were talking about the dignity therapy before with Keith. Can you tell more about some of them?
Yeah, absolutely. And dignity therapy, Keith described that beautifully, and that's such an important program that we've I guess we've had a really strong commitment to since Keith and another volunteer who started, Dave, were our two inaugural volunteers doing that work back in 2013. So we've watched that grow and develop and have a fantastic team of dignity therapy volunteers. We also have a number of other initiatives that we've tried to set up. So our Backyard Blitz program, which is about supporting people around garden maintenance, and that's been going for some number of years now, and probably reasonably well known, I'm not sure. New programs that we've set up, we have one that we've called, which has a funny wee name, but it probably makes sense. It's called Have a Go. So it's a legacy program. It's very much, it came from a young woman who we were providing care for in the program, who wasn't all that keen to engage with the health professionals. But when we linked in and actually went, what is it that you really want to do? She said, well, I'd really like to make cheese. I'd really like to learn how to make cheese. So it started from that. It's like, yeah, okay, let's, and I think our volunteer coordinator put the call out to our volunteers and said, does anyone know how to make cheese? And from there it's gone, and then we went from sausage making, but it's broadened it out. So, and I guess it's that sense of a bucket list for people, you know, is there something that you really want to do? Something that, you know, is really important for you. So we've supported people, and it's we're able to provide it with the support of the Hospice Foundation Geelong in this instance, and we've been able to support people to do a range of different things towards the end of their lives, you know, whether it's the last football game that they get to go and see for Geelong at home, or we've got somebody heading off in a tiger moth for, you know, that's their bucket list. We had a gentleman who got the most amazing tattoo, which was something that was really important for him, which was actually Einstein's theory of relativity, which was, you know, extraordinary. You know, a chap who took his son and they did a bit of a cruise around in a really old Chevy. You know, it's so it's really horses for courses. It's truly patient-centered, and it's very much us asking, you know, what is it that would actually really add to the quality for you. So that's a really great one. I guess we've done some work, and we actually had it opened, well, the first part of it opened in the palliative care unit on Monday by Richard Miles, was our beautiful gardens in the palliative care unit. And I guess we want to continue to develop that and to look at how we can embed horticulture and horticultural therapy into the care of the people, both in the palliative care unit and then more broadly in the program. So, you know, we've got lots of great ideas in that space to try and to expand that. You know, we've got a bit of a reflective garden happening now. We want to actually extend that and look at, you know, the development of horticultural therapy in the space to support that.
Yeah, well, there's a big project there for the foundation to get involved in, and we're sort of having discussions about that at the moment. So if anyone's interested in supporting palliative care and some of the amazing work they do, please get in touch, and we'll be happy to have a conversation. You mentioned the Have a Go program, and I think that really just shows the above and beyond, you know, that your team and the volunteers go to. It's not just about clinical, you know, it's you know, those experiences you provide are just extraordinary. We are running very, very short on time, but you did mention research. Can you just tell us quickly a little bit about research in the palliative care?
Sure, and I'll be really quick. So research is, I guess, it's a really important part of what we do. We actually want to be understanding, are the things that we're trying to implement, are they actually making a difference? Are they improving people's care? And to be able to give back to the sector. So we have, at the moment, I think we've got 13 research projects running from within our program, and that's also about then supporting our clinicians to step into that research space as well. And they're at a range of different stages of completion. You know, some we've got one that I've been quite involved with around telehealth, which is just ready for publication with B&J, so we just need a date for that. Others that have been recently published, others that are at the point of submission, and others that are just starting.
Yeah. Jacqui, thank you so much. We're so lucky to have you leading such an important area of our health service. And I pass over now back to Jack Ayerbe to formally thank everyone. And Jack, you actually had some experience with the palliative care unit yourself.
Well, I did. I was very, very fortunate to be married for a long time to a very incredible woman. And we called her the Duchess because she made the decisions. And at one stage, she eventually died of breast cancer. But in the last few weeks of her life, she said to me one day, I want to go into palliative care at Gracie's, which is Grace McKellar. I said, oh, no, darling, we'll keep you at home. And she looked up and informed me in no definite terms that it was her decision, not mine. And so she went out to Grace McKellar. And can I say, the service there to me and to her was just unbelievable. And in fact, I think in retrospect, she actually died in far better circumstances than if she'd been home. And it worked out very well. But I can never thank enough the staff. And we can have all the great buildings as we want, and they can be fantastic. But at the end of the day, it's the people who work there. The enthusiasm, the love, the devotion those people showed us was fantastic. So I can never thank you enough. And Jacqui, thank you so much for being here. Now, Faggy, I live next door to your uncle. And I learned never ceased to amaze me how much time he spent on community service, and that is endemic in the Fagg DNA. Some people would call me arrogant, and they may be right, I don't know. But however, you have done exactly, you make me feel absolutely inadequate. The stuff that you do, the stuff you've done, I feel like an absolute dill, and as if I've contributed absolutely nothing to society. Look at what you've done. So, mate, thank you for what you've done, what you do, and your contribution to Geelong in particular, but also the greater community is just sensational to that. So, to both of you, thank you very much for what you've done today. And as always, thank you to Francis and your team at Barwon Health Foundation.
Thanks very much, Jack. Thanks, Mike, Keith and Jacqui. In coming weeks, next Thursday, the 22nd of July, we'll be talking to another amazing, passionate Geelong man, Robert Costa, with Paul Lightfoot, for the director of the new Adrian Costa Clinical Trial Centre. So that'll be a very, very interesting session.
That'll be August, is that right? August? You said July, but August, I think.
No, next week.
Next week. Oh, right, yeah. Okay,
Yeah,
right. Okay. The month. Okay.
You're still way behind. You've got to keep
up. Way behind. I'll catch up later on.
next Thursday, 22nd of July. And in the final week, the final webinar on the 29th of July, I'll be talking to the retiring CEO of the Geelong Footy Club, Brian Cook, also chair of Barwon Health, together with the specialist staff, an emergency department researcher at Geelong Hospital, Dr. Julian Stella. So we look forward to those, and I'll send everyone a link to each of those. So thanks again for joining us. Mask up, get vaccinated, stay healthy, and enjoy the rest of this beautiful day. Thanks all. And right now I'm joined by Karlene Wightman, senior lawyer with the Canny Group. Welcome along to the webinar, Karlene.
Thank you.
Now, Karlene, the Canny Group are located in that wonderful development at the Federal Mills. How do you like working from there?
I actually really enjoy it. There's lots of things around, lots of things to look at. You can go down to the water, stretch your legs. The building itself is great, big, spacious. It's a perfect location.
I'm admiring that big pitched roof behind you. And so how many staff work from the Canny Group?
We probably have about 26,
right.
I would say.
Yeah. And what are some of the services that are offered by the Canny Group?
So we offer obviously legal services, not just wills and estates. So we offer property law, conveyancing, litigation, and a range of commercial services, accounting services, financial services, and also we offer NDIS plan management services.
Okay. So we were just talking before, so you've got a sort of a skeleton staff there at the moment because of the we're not quite in lockdown in Geelong at the moment, but just because that's the right thing to do, I guess. Yes. So we've now had an accumulative 6 months in lockdown, and we're grateful that there's some respite in the regional Victoria right now. But what effect is that having on work?
I think it really depends. So I've found that we're still getting a lot of work. People are still buying and selling properties, for example. I've also found that in my area of wills and estates, we're still getting quite a bit of work, but it is dependent, I suppose, particularly for the elderly, whether they are happy to kind of embrace the new technology or whether they really just can't, and therefore it's hard to conduct a meeting with them.
Yeah. Well, you say with technology, so one of the benefits of lockdowns, I suppose, is we're all Zoom or WebEx or Microsoft Team experts.
Yes.
So we can add that to our resumes and LinkedIn profiles. But,
yes.
But in this digital age, we've also become more accustomed to digital signatures. Now, is a will a legal document that can be signed digitally?
It cannot be signed digitally, no. Legislation has been introduced during COVID that allows you to witness a will over a platform such as Zoom or Microsoft Teams, but it still has to be original signatures on the document. So normally when you sign a will, everyone has to be in the same room at the same time to sign that document. Like I said, this legislation allows that to be everyone is on the Microsoft Teams or Zoom at the same time, but it's not like other, I guess there's other situations where clients are actually able to sign digitally and then return it. That's not the case with wills.
No, and I guess with an older population, that makes it very difficult. So I guess you're trying to cram them all in when you've got the ability to do that?
Yeah, very difficult, especially if the client's in a nursing home or something like that. Yeah, so often we will find that we wait until they can come in, or in other circumstances, if we've been allowed to gather outside, I guess, we've been able to sign them outside. We try to get around it for the client, obviously, while also following the legal restrictions of COVID.
Sure. Yeah. Now, the stats show that 52% of Australians don't have a will, and that 54% Victorians don't have a will. So why do you think that's so high, and what are the repercussions of not having a will?
I think, to be honest, that people just don't get around to it, especially the younger generation. They don't necessarily think they need one, or life is just too busy. The repercussions of not having a will, well, I guess it depends on your personal circumstances. So if you don't have a will, the laws of intestacy apply, and whether or not your particular wishes would be followed really depends on what your family situation is. It might be that it doesn't really have an impact on what happens with your estate. Not that I would ever recommend you not having a will, but it might be that it just doesn't impact it. But in other cases, it can have serious ramifications on what you would want.
And what would you say to someone who says that they don't need a will and they've got nothing to leave to anyone?
I would say, well, that's generally not the case. So I think especially one of the sort of hidden assets that a lot of people don't consider is superannuation. They might say, well, I don't have a lot of super, but normally there's a life insurance component attached to that, and a death benefit. And that can be a significant amount of money. And so if you don't, depending on the superannuation and where you direct your super to go, it might be that it falls in the estate, and therefore you would need a will to deal with that.
Right. And can you leave your assets to anyone you choose, or does it have to follow the family food chain?
Well, you can leave it to whoever you choose, but again, the law says, or the law provides, that you have an obligation to provide for certain people, and if you don't, then those people have a right to challenge. So even though I always say to clients, it's your choice, you can leave it to who you want to, I then say to them, but you need to be aware that if you don't, this could happen.
Right. And what about leaving a gift to a charity? Do you see that often?
Yes, we do, quite often. There are a lot of circumstances where people so it can range. Sometimes people have had a lot to do with that particular charity and want to give them a specific gift for various reasons, or the person doesn't have any family, and again, they've got a particular connection to that charity, so they want to leave it to that charity. A lot of people do want to do that.
And what would happen if you were married and left everything to your husband or wife or significant other, and then things went south and you end up getting separated or a divorce? Is your will still valid?
If you separate and you haven't done any sort of property settlement or anything, then the will is still valid. So it's very important that if you separate from a spouse or partner, you change and update your will immediately, basically. It's also important if you divorce, because if you divorce, your will becomes invalid, but I guess it might not. If you have only separated, then you still leave everything to your partner, and that can still be the case. So either of those two situations, I say to people, you definitely have to update your will, but the ramifications of not doing so can be different depending on whether you've separated or divorced.
And generally, how often should we review our wills?
I often say to people, I would look at my will every year if I can, but at least every 2 years. But there are also certain triggers that you definitely should review your will for. So, for example, if you have separated or divorced, if you have children, if you start your own business, lots of circumstances can be where you should update your will.
And in reviewing or updating your will, is that a situation where you've got to completely do the will, you've got to reinvent the whole thing, or can you just make amendments to it?
Yeah, absolutely not. A lot of people do come into me as well, and they say, that this particular circumstance has changed, and I'll look at the will, talk to them about their circumstances, and it may be that they don't have to update their will, or it might be that we can do a codicil to the will, or it might be that their circumstances have changed so dramatically that we need to do a whole new will. I think it's really circumstance dependent.
Yeah, yeah. And is there anything specific that should be considered if you have a blended family when doing your will?
I think the fact that you have a blended family, to me, that's always a big trigger to say you actually do need a will, because the circumstances I was talking about before with the laws of intestacy, that can get very messy and muddied when you have a blended family. But I think you certainly do need to think about your asset structure, who you're wanting to provide for. So again, blended families, sometimes people provide for their spouse and then all of the children. Some people just provide for their children. It really depends on your own asset structure, what you have to take into account.
Yeah. And if you have a will, do you also need a power of attorney?
You don't need one, but I always recommend them. And then depending on your circumstances, I decide what type I think you need. So there are different types. There's one that deals with finances, one that deals with your personal circumstances, and one that deals with your medical, what's going to happen if you have medical issues. And again, depending on your circumstances, your age, etc., I might recommend, I would say it's best to have all of them, but I would talk to the client and tell them which one I think is more important if they're not wanting all of them.
So you're covering quite a few areas there. So who's the best person for the job to be your power of attorney?
Again, that really depends. You need to have someone that you trust implicitly. So if someone has children, for example, you might say, well, your children are the best people, but I guess that does come down to whether you've got that trust in your child, how old they are, whether they've got the maturity to handle the situation. If they don't, you might go to a friend or other family member. Again, it's circumstance dependent.
Yeah. And Karlene, what are some of the triggers that you can share with us that would make you urge people to redo or revisit their will and or power of attorney?
I think anytime a circumstance changes, if you've acquired more assets, if you've had a falling out with a family member, especially if they're executors of your will, if your children have reached 18, you might decide you want them to take a more significant role. If you have children and then you need to put in a guardianship clause, there are lots of different factors.
Yeah. Now, I was reading somewhere recently where there was a Gold Coast man who's engaged by people who are knocking on death's door to go to their funerals or their gravesides and reveal the secrets they want their loved ones to know. Now, I certainly be recommending that. But do you sometimes see people, apart from choosing who they may include and those they exclude, wanting to pass on a message from the grave, as it were?
Yeah, often people, and often I will actually say to clients, maybe you should, especially if you haven't provided equally for your children, maybe you should write a letter to explain why you've done what you've done. Because often in a will, a child might open it and read it and be very insulted when that wasn't the actual intention. Sometimes people do want to rule from the grave and that's just not possible. But a lot of the time I'm more than happy to accept a letter to go with their will and to explain that this is why I've done what I've done.
Well, thank you for all that advice, Karlene, and thank you for the support of the Barwon Health Foundation. And just a reminder, the Canny Group are located at the Federal Mills, and we'll include all that on the closing slide of their contact details. So thanks for tuning in and have a great day.
Thank you very much.